The phone rang at 7:14 a.m., just as I was tying my shoes for work. I hadn't heard that ringtone in 9 years. Not from them. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, someone else's life bleeding into mine. But the screen didn't lie. "Mom!" I stood there, frozen, shoelace hanging loose, heart beating in a slow, unfamiliar rhythm. 9 years ago, they told me not to come back. 9 years ago, they chose my sister's words over my silence. And now, without warning, they wanted to talk. No apology. No explanation. Just a call like nothing had ever been broken. I'm 32 years old now. Old enough to have learned how to breathe through memories I never asked for. Old enough to know that some doors don't creak when they open, they echo. I let the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the pale morning light slipping through the blinds. Outside, the city was waking up, cars humming, footsteps on pavement, a normal day beginning for everyone else. For me, time had folded in on itself. 9 years ago, I was 23. I still believed that if you told the truth calmly enough, people would hear it. That love was louder than accusation. That parents asked questions before passing judgment. I was wrong. The voicemail notification appeared. One message, then another. I knew what they would say without listening. They wouldn't start with, "We're sorry." They never did. They would say something vague, something safe, something that didn't touch the past. "We should talk. It's been long enough. Family is family." Those words used to pull me back like gravity. Now they just felt heavy. I poured coffee I didn't drink and sat at the small table by the window. This apartment wasn't much, one bedroom, mismatched chairs, but it was mine. Every inch of it had been built after they erased me. Every morning, here was proof that I survived the quiet exile they called necessary. I thought about my sister, about how easily her accusations had settled into the walls of our house, how quickly my absence made things peaceful again for them. I thought about the years of silence that followed, birthdays, holidays, a whole adulthood that happened without witnesses. And now this call. Why now? That question pressed harder than the memories. People don't reopen closed chapters without a reason. They don't reach out after 9 years because they suddenly miss your voice. They reach out because something has shifted, something has broken, something they can't handle alone. The phone buzzed again. This time, a text. "Elena, please, we need you." I closed my eyes. Need, not miss, not wrong, not forgive us. Just need. I set the phone face down on the table and finally untied my shoes. Work could wait. This moment couldn't. Because whatever this call meant, I knew one thing with painful clarity. They hadn't come back to heal the past. They had come back because the past had finally caught up with them. The day my parents stopped being my parents didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence, the kind that fills a room before anyone dares to tell the truth, or pretend to. It was a Sunday afternoon, 9 years ago. I remember because my mother had insisted on a family lunch, her voice too cheerful on the phone, as if she already knew how the day would end and needed to soften the edges in advance. I was 23 then, still trying to prove myself, still believing that if I stayed calm and honest, things would work out. My sister, Rachel, arrived late. She always did. She walked in like she owned the room, dropped her bag on the chair, and avoided my eyes. That should have warned me. Instead, I smiled and made space, like I always had. We sat around the table, my parents at the head, Rachel across from me. Plates cooled as conversation stalled. No one touched the food. My father cleared his throat once, then again. My mother folded her napkin too neatly. Finally, Rachel spoke. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She spoke slowly, carefully, like someone who had rehearsed every sentence. She said I had been dishonest, manipulative, that I had taken advantage of their trust. She said I had caused problems behind their backs, things I barely recognized as my own life twisted into something darker. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to interrupt her, to ask what she meant, to ask me if any of it was true. They didn't. I tried to explain. I remember my hands shaking as I spoke, the way my voice kept breaking even though I was trying so hard to sound steady. I denied what wasn't true. I explained what she had misunderstood. I asked quietly why she hadn't come to me first. Rachel stared at the table. My mother finally spoke, but not to defend me. She asked one question, and it wasn't the one I needed. Why would your sister lie about something like this? That was the moment something inside me shifted, not shattered, just went very still. I looked at my father next. He had always been the quieter one, the man who believed logic would eventually rise to the surface. He didn't look at me. He stared at his plate and said, "We just need to know the truth." "I'm telling you the truth," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. There was a pause. Then my mother said the words that ended everything. "If what your sister says is true, then we don't know who you are anymore." If, not is it true, not help us understand. If. Rachel's accusation was given weight before my denial ever had a chance. I stood up then. Not dramatically. My chair barely scraped the floor. I realized, with a clarity that still makes my chest ache, that the conversation was already over. They had decided before I walked through the door. I asked one last question. "Do you believe her?" My father hesitated. My mother answered. "Yes." That was it. No investigation, no time, no space for doubt. My mother's voice softened, as if that made it kinder. "If this is who you are, Elena, maybe it's best if you take some time away." Time away. From my own family. I waited for anyone to stop me as I picked up my coat. No one did. Rachel didn't look up. My parents didn't follow me to the door. I remember stepping outside and being surprised that the world looked exactly the same. Cars passed, a neighbor watered their lawn. Somewhere, someone laughed. My phone didn't ring that night, or the next day, or the week after. That was the day I stopped being their child. Not because I chose to leave, but because they chose not to ask me to stay. The first year after I left felt like living in a house with no mirrors. I existed, but I didn't quite recognize myself anymore. Every decision I made, what to eat, where to sleep, who to trust, felt heavier without the invisible approval I had carried my whole life. I told myself I was free. What I really was untethered. I stayed with a friend at first. Her couch smelled like laundry detergent and old books, and every night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that Sunday over and over. I rehearsed conversations that would never happen. In my head, my parents asked questions. In my head, my sister admitted she had exaggerated, misunderstood, lied. In real life, the phone stayed silent. I checked it anyway. Every morning, every night. I learned quickly what silence does to a person. It doesn't scream, it erodes. It turns confidence into doubt, and doubt into shame. I started wondering if maybe I had done something wrong, not what Rachel said exactly, but something that justified being erased. Work became my refuge. I took extra shifts, said yes to everything, stayed late even when no one asked. Being busy meant I didn't have to feel the weight of being unwanted. I saved every dollar, not because I had plans, but because I was afraid of needing help again. Needing people who had already chosen not to need me. My 24th birthday passed without a message. Then my 25th. Each year, the absence felt sharper than the year before. It wasn't anger that hurt the most. It was the realization that life was moving forward without me in it, and they were fine. Holidays were the worst. I learned to volunteer for extra shifts on Thanksgiving. I learned to pretend Christmas was just another day. I learned to smile when coworkers asked, "Going home for the holidays?" And answer, something like that. I wasn't lying. I just didn't have a home that meant what it used to. At some point, survival turned into routine. Routine turned into strength. I found a small apartment of my own, bare walls, secondhand furniture, a quiet I chose this time. I learned how to cook meals my parents never taught me. I learned how to fix things myself. I learned how to sit with my own thoughts without running from them. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, I'd hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me to be reasonable. Some mornings, I woke up already tired, carrying grief I couldn't name. I avoided talking about my family because I didn't know how to explain them without sounding broken. I told people they lived far away. In a way, it was true. Over the years, something unexpected happened. I stopped waiting. Not all at once, but slowly, like a muscle unlearning a reflex. I stopped checking my phone during holidays. I stopped imagining apologies. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say if they ever called. I built a life that didn't leave space for their absence to define it. I made friends who didn't need explanations, people who showed up without asking me to earn it. I learned what consistency felt like, what safety felt like. I learned that love didn't have to come with tests. Still, there were scars. When someone raised their voice, my chest tightened. When I made a mistake, my first instinct was to disappear. Exile teaches you that belonging is conditional, and it takes years to unlearn that lie. By the time I turned 30, I had stopped thinking of myself as someone who had been abandoned. I was someone who had adapted. I had built something solid out of what was left behind. I didn't stop loving my parents. That's the part people never understand. Love doesn't turn off just because it's inconvenient. But I learned to love them from a distance, the way you love a place you can't return to without losing yourself. I told myself that if they ever reached out, I'd be ready. Not desperate, not pleading, just steady. I didn't know when that moment would come. I just knew that when it did, I wouldn't be the same girl they left behind. After the first call, the silence didn't return. It shifted. My mother didn't leave another voicemail. Instead, she sent a message short, careful, as if every word had been weighed before being released. "We've been thinking about you a lot lately." I read it 3 times, not because it was complicated, but because it was empty. There was no mention of the past, no acknowledgement of the years between then and now, just a sentence that floated, unanchored, asking me to meet them where they were without offering to meet me where I had been. I didn't respond. The next message came the following day. "Your father isn't well. We could really use your help." That one landed heavier. Concern flared instinctively, sharp and immediate, before my mind could catch up. It was an old reflex: drop everything, show up, fix what needed fixing. For years, that reflex had shaped me. Even now, it hadn't completely disappeared. But something felt off. If my father was unwell, why hadn't they said so 9 years ago? Why now? Why through a message that sounded more like a request than a confession? I sat with the phone in my hand, noticing the way my shoulders tightened, the way my breath grew shallow. My body remembered things my mind had learned to question. More messages followed. Not desperate, not urgent, just persistent. "It's time to put the past behind us. Family is still family. People make mistakes. People, not we, mistakes, not choices." They spoke in generalities, as if the truth would somehow surface on its own if we avoided naming it directly. Not once did they mention Rachel. Not once did they ask how I had survived without them. And not once did they say the words I had stopped expecting but still recognized in their absence. "I'm sorry." The realization settled slowly, like a chill. They weren't calling to talk about what happened. They were calling to move past it, without passing through it. That's when the question shifted. It wasn't just why now, it became what changed. I began to listen more carefully, to what they said and what they didn't. My mother's voice, when she finally called again, sounded tired, brittle around the edges. She spoke quickly, filling space before I could interrupt. "Things have been difficult," she said. "We've all been under a lot of stress. All of us." I asked one simple question. "What happened?" There was a pause. Then she said, "It's complicated." Complicated was another way of saying not about you. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, engine off, hands resting in my lap. I realized something that made my stomach drop. If I went back now, I wouldn't be returning as a daughter. I would be returning as a solution. Whatever had gone wrong in their world, they believed I could help fix it. They believed I would step into the role I had once played, the reasonable one, the steady one, the one who absorbed discomfort so others didn't have to. But I wasn't that person anymore. The years without them had taught me how to hear what wasn't being said. And what wasn't being said now was louder than any accusation had ever been. This wasn't a call for reconciliation. It was a call for rescue. And for the first time since that Sunday afternoon 9 years ago, I understood something with complete clarity. If I answered the way they wanted me to, I wouldn't be going home. I would be walking back into exile voluntarily. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It slipped in through fragments, unfinished sentences, anxious pauses, the careful way my mother avoided certain names. It started with a call from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. We exchanged polite words first, the kind people use when they don't know how much they're allowed to say. Then her voice dropped. "Your parents didn't tell you everything, did they?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then continued. "Rachel's in trouble. Real trouble." That was the first time my sister's name came up since the calls began. And suddenly, everything that hadn't made sense started to line up. Rachel's business had failed. Not quietly, publicly. There were debts, legal letters, people asking questions she couldn't answer anymore. The kind of questions that don't go away just because you stop picking up the phone. The kind that follow you home. My parents were overwhelmed, exhausted, afraid. And that was when they thought of me. Not as their daughter, not as someone they had wronged, but as someone who might be useful again. I felt something tighten in my chest, not surprise, but a dull, familiar ache. This was the pattern I knew. Rachel exploded. They panicked, and I was expected to absorb the impact. I asked my aunt a question I already regretted. Did they ever say they were wrong? There was a long pause. "No," she said quietly. "They said it was complicated." Of course they did. Later that evening, my mother called again. This time, her voice cracked. She spoke about stress, about sleepless nights, about how hard it was to watch Rachel fall apart. She spoke about family sticking together. I listened until she finished. Then I asked, "Did you ever doubt her accusations?" Silence. Not a pause. Not hesitation. Silence. When she finally spoke, her answer was careful. "That's not what matters now." That was the moment everything became clear. What mattered to them wasn't the truth. It wasn't justice. It wasn't the years I had spent rebuilding myself from the rubble they left behind. What mattered was that the system they had protected was failing. Rachel, the center of their loyalty, the one whose word had outweighed mine, could no longer hold herself up, and they needed someone stable, someone capable, someone who wouldn't collapse under pressure. They needed me. I hung up and sat on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry in the way I expected. What I felt was something colder and sharper. I was never invited back because I was missed. I was invited back because I was convenient. The realization cut deeper than the exile ever had. Because exile, at least, had been honest. They had chosen her over me and lived with that choice. This was something else. This was asking me to return without repairing the damage. To step back into the family role I had been cast out of, without acknowledging why I had been removed in the first place. I thought of the years I spent questioning myself, wondering if I had been too much, too quiet, too difficult. I thought of how easily my absence had been accepted, how life had gone on without me, uninterrupted. And now, suddenly, I was essential. Not because they had learned, but because they were losing control. I imagined what returning would look like. Conversations where the past was never mentioned. Awkward dinners where my sister's mistakes were handled gently, while my pain remained invisible. A version of me that smiled and helped, and stayed quiet, soothing chaos, without ever being allowed to name it. I realized something then that shifted everything. If I went back, the story would not be rewritten. It would be repeated. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted restoration of balance, of comfort, of the version of family that worked for them. And that version had never included accountability. For 9 years, I had carried the weight of being discarded. I had wondered if they would ever see me clearly again. Now I understood the truth they didn't say out loud. They hadn't changed their minds about the past. They had simply run out of options. And for the first time since the phone rang that morning, I knew exactly what I was standing in front of. Not an invitation, a test. One they expected me to pass by sacrificing myself again. After the truth settled in, the noise began. Not around me, but inside. There was a part of me that wanted to say yes anyway. A small, stubborn voice that sounded like the girl I used to be. The one who still believed that if she showed up one more time, if she stayed calm enough, helpful enough, they might finally see her. That voice whispered that this was my chance. My chance to go back not as the accused, but as the necessary one. That voice was dangerous. Because it didn't speak in logic, it spoke in longing. It reminded me of birthdays spent waiting for a call that never came, of holidays I pretended not to care about, of the ache that never fully went away, the desire to be claimed, to be chosen, to hear my parents say, "We were wrong." Another part of me answered back, quieter, older, steadier. This voice carried the weight of everything I had built in their absence. It asked harder questions. What would it cost me to go back? Not financially, not practically, emotionally. I imagined myself sitting at their table again, listening carefully, choosing my words so I wouldn't upset anyone. I imagined swallowing truths the way I used to, slowly, painfully, convincingly. I imagined apologizing for things I never did, just to keep the peace. My chest tightened. That was the price. And I had paid it before. The child in me argued that I was stronger now, that I could handle it, that maybe this time, I wouldn't disappear. The adult in me knew better. Strength doesn't mean enduring harm, it means recognizing it before it repeats. I thought about the years I had spent teaching myself that I was allowed to take up space, that my version of events mattered, that silence wasn't virtue, it was survival. Going back would require me to forget those lessons. And then there was Rachel. The thought of her reopened something raw. Not anger, exhaustion. I imagined her crisis consuming the room, her mistakes softened, excused. I imagined my parents circling her the way they always had, while expecting me to be understanding, patient, useful, invisible. I realized then that my presence would not heal the family. It would only stabilize it long enough for the old patterns to return. I asked myself a question I had avoided for 9 years. What if they never apologize? What if they never admit they were wrong? Could I still go back? The answer came immediately. No. Not because I was bitter, but because I was done betraying myself to earn conditional love. I stood at the window that night, watching the lights of other apartments flicker on one by one. Each one held a life I would never see, stories I would never know, and yet, they felt closer to me than the house I had grown up in. Because here alone, I was whole. The war inside me didn't end with shouting or tears. It ended with clarity. I didn't need my parents to understand my decision for it to be right. I only needed to stop abandoning myself. And once I did that, the question of whether to go back no longer felt complicated. It felt answered. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted my answer to come from clarity, not emotion. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to soften the impact of my words. I wasn't trying to anticipate how they would feel. I was choosing myself. When I finally called my parents back, my hands were steady. My voice was calm. That surprised me the most. My mother answered immediately. She sounded relieved, as if my silence had been a mistake she was eager to correct. "Elena," she said, "I'm so glad you called." I didn't mirror her tone. I didn't ask how she was. I went straight to the truth. "I've thought about what you asked," I said, "and I need to be clear." There was a pause, the kind that waits for reassurance. "I won't be coming back," I continued. "Not like this." My father took the phone then. His voice was firm, edged with disappointment. "We're not asking for the past to be rehashed," he said. "We just want to move forward." "That's the problem," I replied. "You want to move forward without ever looking back." Silence followed. I could almost hear them searching for the version of me who would compromise, the one who would explain herself into exhaustion. "She's your sister," my mother said quietly. "This is what families do." "No," I said. "This is what families do when they refuse to take responsibility." I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud. I didn't accuse. I simply stated the truth I had spent years avoiding. "I was cut off without being heard," I said. "I rebuilt my life without your support. I won't come back just to hold things together while pretending none of that happened." My father exhaled sharply. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said. "That's it." They asked if I could at least visit, just a weekend, just to talk. I answered honestly. "Not until there's accountability. Not until the truth matters as much as comfort." There were no dramatic words after that. No apologies, no promises. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something better. Solid. For the first time, my boundaries weren't explained. They were stated, and for the first time, I didn't wait to see if they would approve. After that conversation, nothing dramatic followed. There were no angry texts, no sudden apologies, no late-night calls begging me to reconsider. The silence returned, but this time, it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like space. Space I had chosen. Space that no longer hurt. Life went on in small, ordinary ways. I woke up early. I went to work. I cooked dinner for myself and learned to enjoy my own company without guilt. Some days, memories still surfaced: my childhood home, my mother's voice before it hardened, the version of my parents I kept hoping would come back. I won't pretend that part disappeared, but I stopped mistaking longing for responsibility. I understood something I wish I had known years earlier. Healing doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes, healing is recognizing that going back would cost you more than staying away. Sometimes, peace comes not from fixing what broke, but from refusing to be broken again. I didn't shut my parents out completely. I didn't declare them dead to me. What I did was stop standing still, waiting for them to change. My life is no longer a holding place for people who haven't acknowledged the harm they caused. And that choice, quiet, firm, final, gave me something I had never truly had before: freedom. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel painfully familiar, if you've ever been blamed, erased, or asked to move on without being heard, please know this: you are not heartless for setting boundaries. You are not ungrateful for choosing peace. And you are not wrong for refusing to return to places that only value you when you're useful. Family should not require self-erasure. Love should not demand silence. And forgiveness is not something anyone is entitled to without accountability. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Have you ever been cut off by family, only to be called back years later? Your story matters, and it may help someone else feel less alone. And before you go, please consider subscribing to the channel. We share real stories about family, dignity, boundaries, and choosing yourself, especially when it's hard. Your support helps these voices reach others who are quietly carrying the same pain. Thank you for listening. You deserve peace, not permission.